Hello, I'm Julie Allen of Julie Allen Consulting, and I'm back with part 2 of improving psychological flexibility in a pandemic. Psychological flexibility is about noticing what works for an individual to live the life that they want to live, even in the presence of difficulties and obstacles. Psychological flexibility now, from a research perspective, tells us that psychological flexibility is the cornerstone to good psychological health and well-being. At the moment of recording this video, we find ourselves 4 weeks into the coronavirus lockdown, and we know that we have another 3 weeks to go. At the end of this 3 weeks, we don't know whether the lockdown will be lifted or whether it will remain for another number of weeks. During this time, many of us are experiencing many different feelings. And so what I'd like to do today is to understand what you have been noticing since you've started to practice psychological flexibility. To improve psychological flexibility, the tool that I use is Dr. Kevin Polk's ACT Matrix. With the ACT Matrix, we have this vertical line. At the top of the vertical line, we have the 5 senses behaviour. That is what I would see or hear you doing, perhaps. And at the bottom of the matrix is the internal world. That's the internal experiencing. Those are things I wouldn't expect to see. And the horizontal line then, we have away and towards. These are away and towards moves. And in the middle of the matrix here, we have noticing. And so I'd like to start with noticing in the bottom right of the matrix who is important to us. Well, I think most of us will very easily come up with a list of those people that are important to us. It's family, friends, work colleagues, and even myself. So starting with those even to begin with, we move to the bottom left of the matrix, and in the internal world the question really here is what have you noticed that's shown up that would be unwanted in the internal world? Well, having talked to friends, family, and even some of you that might be listening to this, there are some emotions that have been popping up that people would prefer not to experience. Those are things like stress, feeling stressed with the situation that we find ourselves, feeling stress being confined to home. Some people are feeling isolated from colleagues, isolated from family and friends, not being able to have that physical contact. For some then, we might also be feeling a sense of frustration and a sense of anger. Anger and frustration that we have been in this lockdown for this period and not knowing when this will finish. We might also find ourselves disconnected perhaps from work colleagues, the fact that we're not seeing them every day. Some of us might even find ourselves feeling bored of being at home every day, bored of not being able to leave the house other than for those essentials that we know of exercise or shopping or providing shopping to an elderly or vulnerable relative or friend. So boredom can also show up. Some things that might also be showing up for some of you at the moment is a lack of energy. A lack of energy from being out of your routine. And it might also lead us to, we might notice some worry popping up. Worry popping up about the bills that we have to pay, the jobs that we have and whether they will be there in the future. And the thing with the ACT matrix is everything that we've talked about so far is in the bottom of the matrix, and that's the internal world, the internal experiencing. Those are things I've said that I would not see or hear from you. However, in terms of what's in this bottom left and the internal experiencing, when we experience these emotions, it is likely that I will either see or hear you doing something in the external world. That is your behaviour. And so if you think about how you might respond to some of these things, well, in terms of boredom, what you might find yourself is eating more. Some of you might find yourselves eating chocolate, purely out of a sense of boredom or worry. And some of that makes you feel better because you've consumed some of that food and you've eaten that chocolate. In terms of perhaps feeling stress, some of us might consume alcohol. Alcohol can be a relaxant, so we take the alcohol to reduce the stress levels. Some of us, again, if we're feeling that lack of energy, may stay in bed for much longer than we would have done before. Even in terms of the frustration, some of us might complain. We might complain and or argue. And complaining about some people that you believe aren't following the 2-metre distancing rules, some people who you feel are putting others at risk. So complaining again can be an action, a behaviour that we do to get rid of the feeling of frustration and the feeling of anger. We might also find in terms of the boredom that we might be watching TV much more than we had been before. And in fact, one of the big things that we're experiencing in the bottom left of the matrix, which I haven't written, is fear. I think many of us have fear that we would catch the coronavirus, that we would end up in hospital, and that we would be very ill as a result. So how might we respond to that fear? Well, we might respond to that fear in a way that we might watch the news. We might get consumed with watching the news to find information out about the coronavirus. We might find ourselves on social media as a means of finding out more and spreading information about the coronavirus. So thinking about these are some of the things that we might be experiencing in the internal world. These are things that we may do to respond in the external world. The question really is, how do I improve psychological flexibility in this pandemic? How do I live a fulfilled life even in a pandemic? And the question really here is, what could I do to move towards those people that are important? Well, in terms of the coronavirus, there's certainly one person that's important at this point, and that is you. So what can you do to move closer towards yourself, to protect yourself in terms of the coronavirus? And we might say here, so routine is get ourselves back into the routine. Routine might include the exercise. It may also include sleep. And it may also include meal times. It would also be about making sure that our diet is balanced, that we're not feeding ourselves with sugar all the time, and that we're getting the nutrients and minerals and vitamins that our bodies need to be healthy. So we would have nutritious meals is something that we could do to move towards ourselves. We could take vitamin supplements. Particularly we talk about C and D, that would help in terms of the immune system. We might, in terms of the isolation, it would be looking after ourselves is stay at home. It might be then just ensuring that you've got delivery for your shopping. And there are many sites out there setting out the different outlets that are delivering to homes. We could also maybe think about putting some additional structure in our day. Structure in our day, if you're feeling some fear, it might be about spending time to breathe. And it may also, perhaps if you think it would work for you, is not only to breathe, but it is also to meditate. And it might also be, in terms of that isolation, that you make contact with friends and family on a face-to-face call. But I think even with it, it's about noticing what works for you. And that is, in essence, the ACT matrix. The ACT matrix is about noticing what works, workability, to move you towards the life that you want to live. So I think if you could spend some time thinking about what could you do to live a fulfilled life, even in lockdown, and start to move towards and to notice what you want to do to move away. Thank you for watching. Please continue to practice noticing who is important, what unwanted stuff shows up in the internal world that we'd prefer not to experience. Notice how you respond to these unwanted thoughts and feelings, and notice what it is that you need to do to move towards that fulfilled life in this pandemic. Stay safe.